Welcome to CLAT Labs 101, the only series you need to maximize your score, your rank for the CLAT exam. I am Sumitra Joshi, the former student of Focal Point law classes and your host for today. So let's get started. Today, we shall explore how to maximize your score in the logical reasoning section. So let us start with a brief overview of this section. Firstly, in CLAT exam, logical reasoning section is simpler compared to other law entrances such as CLAT, ALET and even MHCET. Secondly, very few type of questions are covered in this exam. Last but not the least, this is a scoring section in the exam if you have the right skills. Warning, this section can be time consuming if you don't have some basic skills. So in the next slide, I'll share some of the best skills to master this section. Without any delay, let me share the 3 essential skills required to master this section. Number 1, good vocabulary. Number 2, speed reading. Number 3, reading between the lines. In the next few slides, Siddesh sir will explain how to develop these 3 skills. Later, he'll share the most common types of questions to show up in this section with the help of the illustrative examples. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sumitra, for the excellent introduction. She mentioned that you need 3 skills in order to master this section. Those are good vocabulary, good reading speed, and finally being able to read between the lines. That is, being able to grasp the hidden meaning in a particular passage. So, now let me tell you, how do you actually develop these skills? The speed of your reading depends upon the size of your vocabulary, and consequently, whether or not you are able to read between the lines depends upon your, you guessed it, reading speed. So the first step is to expand your vocabulary. Now, there is just one proven method of expanding your vocabulary in a meaningful way, and that is to read good quality reading materials for at least 20 minutes every day. That is the only method, there is no other option. Now, let me recommend some good quality reading materials for you in order to expand your vocabulary and consequently improve upon your reading speed and finally be able to read between the lines like I mentioned in the last slide. So, first of all, you have to pick up the quarterly, which is known as The Economist. If you are a student of the Focal Point Law Classes and Research Center, you receive a copy of The Economist every 15 days as part of the coaching program. If you are not a student of Focal Point Law Classes, feel free to subscribe to The Economist for 1 year. The next thing which I recommend that you should definitely pick up to expand your vocabulary is the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. The quality of English in those books is excellent. It is top-notch. It is unbeatable. Now, if you really like books, there is one more author which I can recommend who will help you expand your vocabulary, and that is Mr. Frederick Forsyth. Mr. Forsyth was a journalist before turning into an author, and therefore the quality of English in all of his books is excellent. So, all you have to do is pick up any of these things, sit down quietly in a single place for 20 minutes at a stretch. You can set up a timer if you want, and you have to just read. Simple. Now, before we deal with the 4 most common types of questions which appear in this section, let me tell you a few important points which you would do well to remember. The first thing is, you have to use the elimination method while solving this section. Instead of trying to pinpoint the correct answer, you have to eliminate and cross out the incorrect answers and thus isolate the right answer and mark it down. The second thing you have to remember is, in the logical reasoning section, you are supposed to ignore all of your prior knowledge and common sense. For example, in syllogisms, you might have something like, all dogs are red, some dogs are cats, which is of course logically impossible. It goes against your common sense. But for the purpose of the question, it will be assumed to be true. That is what happens in the logical reasoning section. Last but not the least, and this is extremely important, there may be some questions in which more than one answer seems to be the right answer. But as you know, there is just one perfect answer and you are supposed to mark it down. Many answers can seem to be the right answer, but you have to look for the perfect answer, the keyword being perfect. Now it's time to test yourself. In the last slide, I explained how to develop the essential skills necessary for cracking this particular section of the CLAT exam. Now, chances are you already have those skills, so it's time to find out. Try to read the extract which appears on the left side of the screen in less than 2 minutes, and more importantly, try to isolate the main argument which is put forward by the author in 1 or 2 sentences at the most. So you can pause the video, read the extract, and then continue. If it was up to me, I would have summarized the extract something along these lines. The mysterious third eye of some ancient traditions has been linked to the pineal gland, which inter alia regulates the sleep cycle and produces feelings of tranquility and well being. Now, please notice that I have used the word inter alia. If you are a good law student, if you have been diligent in your preparation, if you have been reading the legal maxims regularly, you know what this word means. Inter alia means among other things. This is one of the common abbreviations which is used by advocates. Now that you are able to summarize large amount of data in a short period of time in a coherent and meaningful way, let me tell you the 4 most common types of questions which show up in the logical reasoning section in the CLAT exam, and I will also show you how to deal with these questions, how to crack them, how to eliminate them. So, the 3 most common types of questions are assumption questions, strengthening and weakening questions, and the last one is inference or conclusion questions. So you might be wondering, what about the 4th type of question, and that is the critical reasoning. So the thing is, critical reasoning involves thinking about a particular thing in a holistic fashion, that is taking into account all the aspects instead of taking into account single or isolated aspects. It involves asking the WH kind of questions: what, where, when, by whom, so on and so forth. There are many types of questions which can fall under the heading of critical reasoning. Therefore, it is not practical to deal with all of those types in this video, which is solely dedicated to the CLAT exam. Another reason is that this is a very rare type of question in the CLAT exam itself, but it is somewhat common in other law entrance exams, especially the ALET. Therefore, in the video which we shall have soon dealing with the logical reasoning section for non-CLAT law entrance exams, we will thoroughly deal with critical reasoning in addition to dealing with many other topics like family relation problems, seating arrangement problems, number series, letter series, so on and so forth. Like I said, these questions don't show up in the CLAT exam, but they do show up in the logical reasoning section of other law entrance exams. So it is only fair and natural that we deal with those types of questions, including the critical reasoning question in the video, which is specifically dedicated to the logical reasoning section of non-CLAT exam. The first type of question which you might encounter in the logical reasoning section is the assumption question. So basically, in the paragraph, the author is trying to advocate something, or trying to pin his hopes on something, or trying to support some idea or some conclusion. Now, while making his arguments, there are things which are left unsaid, which are left unstated by the author. So the essential skill for cracking this type of question is to be able to assume what has been left unsaid by the author. If you are able to read between the lines, if you have mastered that skill, this type of question will be easy for you. So towards the bottom of the screen, I have mentioned 2 forms in which this question can show up in the question paper. So feel free to pause the video, read those 2 types of questions, and then we can move on to the next slide. In the previous slide, we discussed the first most common type of question which shows up in this section, and that is the assumption question. In this one, we shall try to deal with the strengthening and the weakening type of question, that is the second most common type of question to show up in this section. Now, the essential skill in order to be able to solve this type of question is being able to summarize large amount of data in a coherent and meaningful fashion within a short period of time. In other words, you should be able to isolate the author's main argument in less than 3 or 4 minutes. Once you are able to do that, you will be able to tell which of the following options goes against the author's arguments and therefore weakens the author's arguments, or on the other hand, which option is aligned or runs parallel to the author's argument and thus strengthens his argument. Again, towards the bottom of the page, I have mentioned the two most common forms in which this question appears in the logical reasoning section. Once again, please pause the video for a second or two, go through the form in which this question appears, and then we can move on to the last most common type of question, that is inference or conclusion question. So far, we have already dealt with the two most common types of questions which appear in the CLAT exam in the logical reasoning section. Now time to deal with the third most common type of question, and that is the conclusion or the inference question. This is the most straightforward type of question you can receive in the logical reasoning section, simply because this is nothing but you are supposed to summarize the passage in your own words and mark the answer which most closely aligns with your own summary. So naturally, the essential skill required for cracking this type of question is being able to summarize large amounts of data in a coherent and meaningful way in a short period of time. I am repeating myself for a reason. This skill is extremely essential and therefore I have to hammer it home. Again, towards the bottom of the page, you can see the most common forms in which this question shows up in the CLAT exam. Once again, pause this video, go through these two forms, and from the next slide onward, with the help of the extract which appeared in some of the previous slides, we will try to solve one illustrative example from each of these types of questions. In the last few slides, I told you almost all the types of questions which can show up in this section of the CLAT exam. Now it's time to get practical. So let us try to solve one example from each of the type of questions with reference to the extract regarding the pineal gland, which has already appeared previously in this video. So the first question that we shall look at is the assumption question. Carefully read the question which appears on the right hand side of the screen. Pause the video for 2 minutes and using the skills which I mentioned previously, try to pinpoint the correct answer. You will find out the correct answer in the next slide. The best tip for solving the assumption type of question is to use the elimination method. You have to eliminate the options which are obviously incorrect and which obviously go against the grain or which obviously go against the ideas expressed in the passage. So, if you look at option number 1, it says that in some animals, the pineal gland is an inert organ, which is exactly opposite of what is mentioned in the paragraph. So naturally, option number A is the incorrect option. Option number B tells you about the pituitary gland. Now the passage doesn't mention anything about the pituitary gland at all. It is exclusively focused on the pineal gland. So since some outside information has been introduced, that option is also incorrect. If you look at the third option, it says that the pineal gland has been found to be sensitive to sound and smells. Now, the passage doesn't mention whether or not the pineal gland is indeed sensitive to sound and smell. However, it is clearly mentioned that it is sensitive to the intensity and angle of natural light. So again, since some unknown or outside information has been introduced, that option is also out of the window, which leaves us with just one option, and that is option number D. So instead of trying to figure out the correct option, first you have to eliminate the incorrect options so that ultimately you are only left with the best answer, which is the right answer. Now it's time to deal with the second most common type of question which shows up in this section of the CLAT exam, and that is the strengthening or the weakening question. So, read the question which appears on the right hand side of the screen. Take 2 minutes, pause the video, try to figure out the answer using the techniques which have been discussed previously, and then you can check your answer on the next slide. In order to answer this type of question, that is a strengthening or a weakening question, it is mandatory to be able to summarize data in a meaningful and coherent fashion. If you don't have that skill, you will most likely mark the incorrect option in this type of question. So, please try to go back and remember or figure out the summary for this extract because it will help us answer the question. Now, if you look at the first option, it says that in some animals, the pineal gland resembles an actual eye, which is supported by the passage also. But we are supposed to figure out the option which will weaken and not strengthen the conclusion in the passage. Naturally, the first option tends to strengthen the author's conclusion, and therefore it is the incorrect option and it is out of the window. Now, if you look at the third option, option number C, pineal gland has been found to be sensitive to sound and smells. Now that is an incorrect option because of the same reasons I mentioned earlier, namely because it introduces some extra information which is not supported by the extract. If you look at the last option, that is option number D, it says that the hormone serotonin helps the pineal gland produce the hormone melatonin, which is the truth and which is also supported by the passage. So, option number D tends to strengthen as opposed to weaken the author's arguments, and therefore, naturally, option number D is also not the correct option, which leaves us with option number B, which says that the pineal gland is an inert organ which serves no function whatsoever. Now, the passage has clearly mentioned the functions which are served by the pineal gland. Therefore, clearly it is not an inert organ. Hence, since option number B is mentioning something which tends to weaken the author's conclusions, that happens to be the correct option and you should mark it down. That finally leaves us with the third most common type of question which appears in this section, and that is the question based on inference, or the question where you are supposed to figure out the inference or the conclusion of the passage. This is, like I said, the most straightforward type of question, and this involves the direct application of a skill which I mentioned previously, that is being able to summarize large amount of data quickly, effectively and coherently. So, once again, pause the video for 2 minutes, carefully read the question, and using the skills discussed previously, try to pinpoint the correct answer. You will find out the correct answer in the next slide. By this point, you are aware of the drill. First, you have to eliminate the options which are obviously incorrect. So if you look at option number A and B, they express ideas which, like I said, go against the grain, which actually go against the ideas which are expressed in the actual passage. If you look at option number D, it mentions something that has no support in the passage, even though it might be true or it might be false. But the point is, option number D doesn't have any support in the passage, and therefore it is the incorrect option, which ultimately leaves us with option number C, which is the right option, since it also mentions an idea which is aligned with or allied to the idea which is expressed in the extract itself. Now, if you are serious about becoming a polished advocate, and also if you are serious about maximizing your rank and your score in the CLAT exam, I warmly invite you to study with us at the Focal Point Law Classes and Research Center. Our batches for the CLAT exam are starting 1st of September. So, If you are serious about your career, if you want to be a good lawyer, you have no choice but to study at the Focal Point Law Classes and Research Center, where the best legal minds are born and curated. Thank you for joining us for this session in which we explored how to maximize your score in the logical reasoning session. In the next session, we shall deal with the current affairs section or the general knowledge section. Until that time, goodbye. Jai Hind.